Hey guys, welcome back to a new episode of Dev Drawer. Today we're going to be doing probably the final compilation of 2020, and this was recorded prior to January the 1st, 2021, so Happy New Year's. If you're seeing this after New Year's Day, it'll probably go live after New Year's Day, but it was recorded prior to doing that, so I wanted to go ahead and, because I didn't know what my recording schedule was going to be like with the holidays, I wanted to go ahead and get something set up for you guys so I can just push it out. But if it is past New Year's, and I hope you had a happy and safe New Year's. So today we're going to be going over a compilation of the Swagger documentation videos that we did, as well as setting up tokenization using JWT and Ajax, as well as Swagger. So we're going to be kind of going over those videos again, and I guess let's go ahead and get started with it. So first thing that we want to do is kind of figure out how we want to go, what direction we want to go with the API documentation. Personally, I like using Swagger. If you've never heard of Swagger, there's a lot of really cool resources that you can find on it. Sometimes their documentation may be a little bit lacking, especially if you're moving from version 2 to version 3, which switches over from the Swagger calls to the OpenAPI calls. In this video, we're actually going to be using version 3, and we're going to be using those OpenAPI calls because that is the more modern version of Swagger. But whenever you're working with Swagger, it doesn't work well with PHP. So we're going to install another tool created by Zercoat. I believe I pronounced that correctly. If I didn't, I apologize. But there's actually a file that you can, or something that you can get from GitHub that would allow you to take your PHP and convert those functions and methods and everything that we've created previously into the documentation that Swagger UI would use. So first thing I'm going to do is, let me switch from Postman to Chrome here, and we're going to go to GitHub and download something from for PHP Swagger from Zercoat. So let me go over here, and let's do GitHub, and then I'm just going to search for Zercoat, Z-I-R-C-O-T-E, and then Swagger PHP. And the first one that appears is the one that we want to go with. So whenever you're looking at this, it's pretty self-explanatory as to how you would get it on your website. But there's a few things that we want to do differently. Like, we don't want it to be API / the actual file that the documentation is pulling. We're actually going to create a new folder called documentation, so whenever you want to reference the documentation, everything will be compiled inside of that folder. So let's go ahead and we're going to install Zercoat in our main directory. So over here, I'm going to open up a new terminal window, and I'm going to make sure that we are in our live API. So let's do cd live/API, and now we're in this folder right here. So let me go ahead and minimize everything else so it's less confusing. So let's take all this. Alright, so now we're inside of our API folder. What we want to do is take this composer requirement, and we're going to paste that in here, and we're not going to add it to a folder right now. We're actually going to use this part of it inside of our main API folder, and then we will take the actual Swagger itself and throw it inside the documentation folder. So for right now, let's just go ahead and run this code that you can pull from the composer, or the GitHub for this framework. So while we're waiting on it to pull over, let's kind of recap what we've done previously. So we ended up creating a CRUD system that uses an API rather than the standard PHP CRUD operations that we did in my first few videos. This uses the API to do your create, to read, to do the single, to do your updates, as well as your deletes. And it makes it a lot easier to manage your code, because on the front end, you don't have to use PHP. Like in this project, we're not actually using PHP. Everything is being done through these pages and this JavaScript. So if you want to reference how we did this, there's a few videos that we've done previously where we actually used Sammy.js to create this application. And the reason that we're doing it this way is because in the future, if we ever wanted to build a web app, we could take this code and just essentially copy it into something like Cordova and build out a web app without having to worry about the PHP conversions, because all the PHP is handled through the API, which will be on its own separate server. Okay, so we have the API, and we have our vendor, we have Zercode, and then we have the PHP Swagger PHP installed here. So now what we want to do is, if you read down a little bit further, it'll tell you what you can do with all of your, basically you add this to your methods, your controllers, however you want to do it. So I'm going to go ahead and open up our controllers to the only page that we have, which is pages.php, which we're already on. Let me minimize this a little bit so you can see better. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we're going to copy over this, and we're just going to paste it in there. This is essentially going to tell the API what your version is, what the name of it is. There's a lot of other stuff that you can add here, and if you read through OpenAPI, which is what this stands for, OA, OpenAPI, you can get more of the titles, information variables that you can use, so you can push over support links, contact information, about, stuff like that. You can add that to your API. So I'm going to change this, and since this is our live server, we're going to say API live test, and we're just going to make it version 1.0. And then we're going to grab this, and we're going to throw it on top of our read function. So our read is a GET. Whenever you're using an API, you have different post types that you can send over, or different types that you can send over. You have GET, put, post, and delete. They're all kind of similar. However, they do different things. So this GET doesn't expect any variables to be passed with it, or it would be using something inside of the URL, which would be like question mark, this variable equals this. You can use GET for that. Post is whenever you post something from a form. Put is whenever you are updating something. So for example, we're going to show you how to do the update in the, I think the next tutorial, and that's going to be where it'll, the put just updates with something that already exists, and then delete is self-explanatory. So for right now, let's just format this the way that we want it. And I'm going to, where's this at? Look at my previous documentation just to make sure I'm following it correctly. Good. Okay, all right. Let's clean this up a little bit so it's a little bit easier for you guys to read at home. And we're just going to make it a little bit more simple to read. One thing that you can notice is your responses that you're able to get. You have different kind of responses that you need to pass. Like for example, this one is going to have a response of 200, which that essentially means it's a success. And then you can also have another response that's 404, which essentially means that it doesn't exist. So right now, that's going to be the two responses that we send back. So we have a success response and a not found response. We're going to change this path because we're not using API resources. We're actually going to change this to the API of this read function. So for our case, it's API/v1/pages and then read. And then we're also going to tag it so that it groups them together on the actual documentation. We're going to tag it. So tags equals pages. And this is essentially going to tell it that it needs to group all of these underneath pages, and then you would change that for the different type of controller that you have. And I think, nope, I need to do this. So this needs to be a star and a space. Let me turn off word wrapping for a second. There we go. Let's take that and push it down, and then this goes like this. Okay, then we're going to put a comma, and let's just copy this one again. I copied the wrong one because it didn't have the OA response. So then we're going to do 404, and again put it as not found. There we go. And that should be it for our read functionality. And I'll show you how to actually view this. If we go to it right now, there's not going to be anything there because we don't have our documentation, because there's another step that you need to do. Whenever you are generating this JSON file. Right now it's XAML, but we're going to be running it in the JSON format. So whenever you're creating that format or this file, it's basically going to read inside of our controllers, and then it's going to push that content as a JSON file, which then the Swagger UI would use. So let me go ahead and copy this. And then inside of our API, we're going to create a new folder called documentation. And then inside of that documentation folder, we're going to create a file called api.php, which is essentially going to turn into our JSON file. So let's do new file api.json, or not api.json, api.php, because it's going to convert automatically to a JSON file for us. And I'll show you how to do that in just a second. Okay, so typically they want you to run XAML. XAML doesn't really work well on my server. I don't know if it's a setting that I need to turn on. I've just never really used XAML before, so if you have any experience with XAML, this might be a different situation for you. But for me, I actually want to run it as a JSON file, so I'm going to change this from XAML to JSON. And then here, instead of to YAML, I'm going to do to JSON. And then up here, this is where you're telling it that you want to scan for your methods, your controllers, your functions. So we're going to copy, let me see, in one of our, let's say our read page. I always use the document root just because it's easier to point it to exactly where I want it to go. So we're going to take this, we're just going to delete this, and then we're going to put in /API/controllers, because that is where our functions and our methods and classes and everything reside right here. So now if we go to our API/documentation/API, then it should produce the JSON file that we want. So let me make sure that y'all can see the screen. Alright, so let's go over here and we're going to do /API/documentation, and oh, I forgot to do this same thing over here. So the vendor auto reload is inside of the root as well. So let's just go ahead and copy this over and save this. Vendor, so API, let me see where it's going. So it's in live vendor autoload.php. Live API. Why is it no? There we go. Live API. There we go. All right. So now this is it's actually JSON code, and it has all the information. So the API live test 1.0, and then it grabs the read, tags it as pages, and then operation ID equals read, and then the responses. So this is essentially producing the JSON code that our Swagger UI is going to use. Okay, now that we've installed everything, we're going to switch over to the Swagger part of it. So I'm going to go over here to just Google Swagger, and we're going to be using the Swagger UI. However, we're only going to be using the distribution folder from Swagger UI. So let's go over here to download Swagger UI, and then we're just going to open up the GitHub. And essentially what we're going to do is just copy this, and then we're going to run that in our terminal underneath the API folder, because we want the entire thing to be downloaded. So let me minimize these so they're kind of closed. Inside of the API folder, we're just going to download it in here, and then we're going to make a copy of the distribution folder and label it as Swagger inside of our documentation. So let's go here to git clone, and then we're going to paste in that URL, and it's going to be cloning Swagger UI into this folder here. So let's just give it a second to pass through it. And while we're waiting, Swagger also has an online version of it, so let me open up that real quick. Let's go back a few to here. If we go to their home page, you have your Swagger editor, And what's pretty cool about this is you can actually see the Swagger JSON as it's created and then what it creates on this side of it. There we go. Resize it a little bit so you can see better. But basically, this is the JSON script that we're going to be dynamically generating from our methods and controllers and all this kind of stuff in order to get these links. And then we're going to have a page very similar to this one without all the JSON code on it. So now that it's downloaded, let's the next thing we need to do is move the distribution package, which would be this folder here. We want to move it to our documentation, so we're going to use the command line for that. And let's do mv, and I think it's let's see, we're currently in the API folder, API, so let's do that. And no, let's switch over to the Swagger folder. So let's do cd Swagger UI, not CS, cd Swagger UI, and then we're going to do move, and then we're going to point it back one. So it references the distribution folder inside of this. I think we need that. So let's see, let's try to do it this way. Move distribution folder to whatever path you want it to go to. For us, it's going to be /documentation, and then we're going to call it Swagger. Let's see if that runs. Failed. Positional parameter cannot be found. Well, let me see what it did. Move distribution Swagger. Actually, I think we can just do it this way. Documentation Swagger. Okay, there we go. I just had to, I don't know why I was using Composer type here. So let's go here. Now we have our Swagger folder, which has all of the files that we want it to have in it, which has the JavaScript and CSS for Swagger. So if we open up our browser again, let me make sure that y'all can see that window. Okay. Then we're going to go over here to Swagger index.html. It has a demo, basically what you saw on the demo for the actual Swagger website. That is what you're seeing here. So you can reference it in your code. You can always go back to see how they're doing it on their side of it as well. So what we want to do right now is take this index.html, and we're just going to highlight all of this. Let me close out the terminal. We're going to copy this, get out of the Swagger folder, go straight into our documentation, and we're going to do new file, and we're going to call it index.php. And then we're just going to paste that in here. So if you look through this, it's essentially just formatting how the look of the page is going to be. So we're going to save that, and we're going to go back one to the documentation. And right now it's blank because we haven't set up the variable to point to where we need it to go. So on our, let me pull it up here. On ours, we're actually going to type in the full URL, which whenever you actually publish this live, it would be the full URL of your API. So we're going to come over here, and we're going to type in HTTP, and we're going to grab this from here to paste in here. I think I can copy the HTTP. Okay, there we go. So we got the live API.local/API, and then we're going to do /documentation/API.php. And that should produce us with that simplistic result that we have in our pages where it's showing just this one section. Let's go over here and refresh. And where am I not pointing it to? Let me see. Inspect console. Okay, so it's not pointing to the, oh, okay. So it's got to do, we're currently in the documentation folder. We need it to go into Swagger. So I believe the only thing we need to do here is just type in Swagger /. Let's go ahead and copy and paste that there. Same thing with our style sheet. Paste that there. and our favicons. I don't really need them for this tutorial, but let's just go ahead and put them in there anyway. And then everything else should be correct. So let's do a refresh. There we go. All right, so that doesn't matter for us. And you may see the invalid call here. Right now, we are not too worried about this part because the code works. So if we run this and we try it out, it should pull back all of the pages. The same thing that we would have saw in our Postman, which I can show you by switching back to Postman. So we have home, about us, contact us, services, and that's because it's hitting the same URL that our documentation is now hitting. So let's get rid of Postman again. And what's cool about this is that you can control, obviously you see it has API live test version 1, it's getting this page, and they're going to be grouped together by pages. So let's say if we wanted to go over here to this, and I know this isn't going to be the correct way to do it, I'm just going to show you real simple how it is to add different functionality into it. So we're going to do, instead of doing read, we're going to do single, and it's going to be tagged under pages. And if we save it and then refresh, now we have a single, which is currently a get value, but we're not going to do get, it's going to be a post. So first thing, we're going to not pass a get, we're actually going to be passing a post. And on the documentation side of it, you'll see the difference between get and post because it's a different color. And then we're going to pass that URL that goes to our single. We're going to tag it as a page so that it's grouped together with this API response up here. But over here, instead of just going straight to the responses, we are going to pass some other variables to go with it. So the first variable is going to be @OA, and we're sending this over as a request body. But you can also do, I think it's get, not this part, but here there's actually like in the string, the URL of it, you can pass variables that way. But for us, for what we actually want it to do, let me show you what the result is in Postman. So let's switch over to Postman real quick, and we're going to change this from single or read to single, and then inside of the body we're going to pass this form data slug, and the value is going to be about, and then we're going to send it, and then you can see that it produces the content. So we need to be able to pass this and give the people that are reading the documentation the ability to enter in this slug. So let's switch back over to our browser and then our code, and inside of this request body, because that's how it's being pushed through, we are going to add a media type. And you have to be kind of careful with your text here. It all has to be commented out so it doesn't run during the code time. But this is what that Swagger PHP does. It actually converts this into the JSON file. We just have to put in the information that we want it to have. So we're going to do another declaration type of OA media type, and I forgot my star here. Okay, so OA media type, and we're going to pass in that we're looking for a media type of form data. So let's do our star, and we're going to do media type equals multi-part / form - data. And that's essentially the same thing that you would have in your form declaration whenever you're going to pass the information to it. It's a multi-part form data, and it's just going to be passing a string for us. So let's go down one more, and we're going to actually create that schema that OpenAPI is going to be looking for. So let's do @OA /schema, and then we're going to, because you have to pass a variable, we have to do it as required variables. So the first part of this is going to be required equals slug, because that's the only variable that we're passing right now, but it does need to be required. And let me go ahead and format this out so that it works when we go to run it, and it looks a little cleaner. And then we're going to do, we're going to send a property to it as well. So we're going to do OA /property, and then we're going to pass the property equals slug, and then we're going to say that it is a string. And I believe, let's just go ahead and put this on the same line. It's wrapping really weird again. Toggle that. Okay, so I'm going to scroll over a little bit, and actually let's get rid of the sidebar because we don't need that right now. So just to kind of show you what it looks like total, so we're passing a post variable to the single. It's going to be passing a form data request body that has a required item of slug, and then that slug is a string. You can also do an integer, and I'll show you, some of that a little bit later when we get into those parts of it. And then since this is a request body, we are going to put a comma here, and let's go ahead and tab these over as well so that it kind of lines up with our everything that we're trying to do. We don't need to have a comma here. Okay. All right. So now if we go back to our browser over here and refresh, now we see that there is a post here, and it's also requiring a slug be entered. And it's passing it as a multi-part form data with our success and not found. So if we click on try it out this time, it gives us the ability to type in something. So if we type in about, then we hit execute, it is now bringing back the same information that was displayed inside of our Postman window. So about us, this is the about us page. But now it's coming from our own API. So let's close out of those. And now let's worry about the, hold on, I got my window down. There we go, so y'all can see. The next part we're going to have to do is the create. And as you can see from our code here, we have slug, order ID, title, and content all need to be sent to it. So we're going to have a somewhat a variation of this code. So let's copy this code and paste down into our create. And we're going to change this to create. And it's still going to be tagged under pages, so it's grouped together. But let me show you what happens if you don't tag it under pages. Let's say we want to tag it under, I don't know, functions. Function. If we refresh the page, now we have two sections. So that's essentially what that tag does. You can group your structure together. So we're going to put it back under pages. And then this time, if you look at the code, where'd it go? Here. If you look at the code, we are sending over v1 and the create. We're sending over a JSON decode, meaning that we're sending over a JSON string to it. It's not a form that's being sent over like the read is. It's more of like a it's just a JSON string that's being sent over that has all this information in it. So let's go back to our, close that, pages, and we're going to change this up a little bit because it's no longer going to be a media type multi-part form data. It's actually going to be a media type JSON. And then the schema is going to be kind of sort of the same, but instead of just requiring one thing, we're going to require the slug, the title, the content, and the order ID. And just so you can see this a little bit better, I'm going to put it on a new line. There we go, right here. And we're going to be able to copy this for the most part. So let's do a comma here. Actually, let me copy this entire thing. We're going to be passing over 4 variables. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. And one more for the order ID. Alright, so the slug, the title, and the content can be passed over as a string, so we don't need to worry about those. But on this one, the order ID, we're going to be passing over an integer. Okay? So now that we have, I mean, that's essentially the only changes that you really need to make. It's very similar to what's up here. It's just it's not the form data. It's actually a JSON that's being passed. Let's look at our response over here. And that's one thing you have to look out for. If you see that, it means the comma is not in the right place or something like that. So let me verify this code. Oh, okay, that's because I'm trying to group everything together because it was all on one line. It's all grouped together like this. We just need to add a new ending parentheses there. Okay, so I just had it where up here you can see that the property and the requirement and everything, it's all on one line underneath this parentheses. What I was doing with the double quotes was essentially closing out this schema every time. So now if we refresh, we have our pages create, and you can see here that it's actually showing you what you need to create. So if you hit try it out, you would just modify this. But we also want to kind of give them, if you enter in just a string here, we're expecting HTML based on the website itself. So we're going to show them what they need to input there by putting in an example of what they need to do. So behind the string, we're going to do example equals HTML only. And then this will give them an example of what they're looking for. And then the other ones are pretty much self-explanatory, so we don't need to do anything with those. Let's refresh, and now it says that you can put in HTML. So let's create one and see what it does. But first, I'm going to switch over to Postman, and we're going to do pages read, send, so we can see all the pages. We currently have 4 in there. We're going to use this to create a 5th. So let's try it out, and let's put in test, and then test page, and then here we're just going to type in this is a test page, and we have 4 other pages, so let's do order ID of 5. So now if we execute this, we can see that it was successfully created. Well, y'all can't see that because Postman is still up. So I just typed in this information and then hit execute, and it shows page successfully created. Now if I switch over to Postman, you can see if we refresh this, so let's send it again, back over here, and now we have 5 pages with the test page being created here. So that's how we would edit or insert a new page. But what I want to do is show you how to edit a page as well. So we know this one has an order ID of 6, test page, so I want to go in there and fix it where it doesn't have test as lowercase. So Postman's in the way again. Let's go back over here, go to our code, and we're going to edit this test where it has an uppercase for the page name. And how you do that is essentially the same thing that you did in create, because our functions are very simplistic, very simple functions. Everything is very much the same. We're not using any specifics outside of like grabbing an ID or something like that. So it's very easy just to copy and paste what we have. We're going to do the same thing that we did here, but we're going to change this to the update parameters. And if you remember, we don't give them the ability to update the slug, so we're going to change this to ID because we do need to pass that ID in order to do a post to the update of the inside of the database. Sorry, my throat is very dry right now, so I'm kind of hammering through it a little bit, but very dry. Okay, so let's do integer. And then we're also going to send over an example for this one and just say like, we're going to make all of them have examples. So let's say example equals 5. No, let's see, what was the ID that was created on this one? 6. Let's just say we're going to have a 6 in there. Better yet, let's do a 2 because we know we're always going to have that about us page for now. So we're going to do an example of 2. And then we're going to change this from slug to ID, so it's requiring that ID be entered. The title can be the same. We're going to add in an example equals about us, and then the integer for the order ID, I think the about us was 2, so we're going to do just a sample of 2 is there as well. So example equals 2. I think that is it, but we're not using post here. This is actually a put because it exists, whereas a post does not. So we're going to do the put response instead of the post response. And now if we switch back over to here, now we have our put for pages update with our examples in here. So, but I don't want to change the about us. I want to change our test page. So order ID or ID of 6. So we're going to try this out. We're going to change this to a 6, and we're going to fix this test page, and this is a test page. Now normally all of this will be handled through your forms on your website, so this is just something that's for you to test with, not for anybody else, just for your developers, for you to be able to understand the code that they're looking at and be able to see it happen in real time. So right now we're going to come over here and execute this, and we see that the page was updated successfully. And if we go back to our Postman window and we rerun this, we can see that the test page now has the proper case as it should. And we don't have to keep switching to Postman because we created that first function way up here at the top to read, and if we try it out, it displays the exact same thing. So we don't have to keep switching back and forth if you don't want to. I'm just trying to show y'all different ways to look at the same endpoints. Alright, so we've got the read, we got the single, we got the create, we got the update, so now we have to handle the delete, which the delete is very easy as well. Let's go up here and we're just going to copy this one again, and now we're going to paste it right above the delete function. I'm going to change this to delete, keep the pages the same. It's still going to be getting passed over as a media type, and we don't need to require anything on this except for the ID, so we can get rid of all of these. And I think that is it. Let's not give them an example. And now let's switch back, do a refresh, and now we have a delete, but it's not the correct type. This is actually going to be a delete type because we want it to be a delete in our documentation, so it gives us that red delete. And our ID for the new page is 6. So let's come over here, we're going to try it out, and we're going to pass the ID of 6, execute it, and it says this page was deleted successfully. So if we come over here and we read it again, we should only have 4 results. So now we have 4. So essentially we took that API that we created previously and we gave it a sort of a rudimentary GUI. This is for the documentation. And what's really cool about using Swagger is that right now we're doing it through the HTTP method, but you can also do it as HTTPS. You can have another section up here that grabs tokens. It passes those tokens for your authorization and all this kind of stuff. We don't really have any of that going on with our current API, so we don't need any of those, but you do have the ability to create tokenization, which I can show you real quick. So if we go back to Swagger, let's just go to the main search. And if we go into the editor, let's try the live demo. And as you can see here, you have this authorize button using HTTPS schema, as well as some other information that you can include inside of it. So if we click on authorize, it'll give you the ability to do your client ID, what the scope is, all this kind of stuff, and then you can actually have where your API has an API key that's authorized that you can push every time you go to do something on it. So it's pretty cool how you can do that, but we don't have that functionality built into our system, so I can't show you this without building it out, which is not going to be part of this tutorial. Right now I just wanted to kind of show you how you can create your own documentation using Swagger. It's pretty easy. You just have to kind of really do your research on these OpenAPI tags. They have documentation out there for them. I think if you go to their website and see resources, OpenAPI specification, and we're currently using OAS 3.0. You can look through how they are currently doing it. So if you go to the documentation, you can see the basic structure of it, what you can add into it. This is just a sample and it's already kind of built out in the YAML format. But if you wanted to, you could see how yours looks in JSON and code it into your code. They have tons of documentation for Swagger 2.0, 3.0. Just depends on how far you want to go with it. There may be some things that you can find in my code that are not done correctly, but I'm also using just the very small portion of what Swagger could actually do just to kind of show you to get started. I don't know if you remember from one of the previous videos that we did where this is being created automatically because it's reading from the database. However, in our file system over here, we have these templates, and whenever we create a new page in the database using the API, we have to go in there and create a template to match it. So what I want to do today is make it where whenever you create something using the API, it actually goes in here and creates this template for you, which is a very simple template. There's not that much that's going on here. It's just a page, the content. It replaces the H1 with whatever's inside of the database, and then grabs the script for this, which automatically comes in here to the get pages script and essentially just reaches out to this pages folder to grab the template. So that's essentially what we're going to be doing today, is kind of taking some of the functionality that we did with the create and the delete in our API and making it where the PHP code would go in there and create these templates for us. So it becomes more of a, I guess more of like a CRUD system. It's still not 100% a CRUD because there's not really a front-end interface for this. We're still going to be using this interface in order to create this code. But before we get started, if you haven't liked the channel yet, or if you haven't subscribed to the channel, there's plenty of videos out there that I do that are just like this. So if you have an interest in this type of thing, definitely subscribe. If you like this video, like it, comment on it. I've been getting a lot more comments and likes lately, and it's very much appreciated. So if you're interested in this kind of thing, I have all kinds of tutorials that I've been doing. I think I got about 30 or 35 of them so far. And just some news coming up, I'm actually going to be doing a 2-hour-long tutorial video with Freed Code Camp on YouTube. So that's a pretty big thing for me, so be looking out for that on Free Code Camp, where DevDrawer is actually going to be focused on building a WordPress website and building out a WordPress template from scratch, and even going all the way out to how to publish it within like one video. So be looking out for that in the next few weeks, but for now, let's go ahead and get started on building this. So if you look in the PHP that we've created for our API, you can see that we have our read function, our single function, create function, update function, and delete function. What I want to do here is make it where whenever you create a new page, I want it to pass the slug that's being created, so it'll go in here and create this template. So in order to do that, one of the first things that we need to do is create a new function within inside of this class. So let's go down to the bottom, and we don't have to do anything with Swagger for this, just because it's a function that's going to be used within the API. It's not really a function you can call outside of this specific call to the create function inside of the API. So we don't have to create any documentation for it. So let's go ahead and create our function, and let's call it create page HTML, and then we're going to be passing a slug and a title because both of those are required whenever you create that template. All right, so now we know what we want to hit, but there's a few things I'm going to turn off temporarily in order for us to see how it works inside of this create function here. Because right now, if we run it, it'll actually create the page in the database, but it won't create it on the front end. So I don't want to run the function yet. So we're going to come back up here to our create function. Where's it at? Here. And let's just go ahead and comment out this code for now. And then we'll turn it back on whenever we get done testing our functions. So we are grabbing the slug here and the title here. So what we're going to do is be passing that slug and that title to that function that we just created. So let's come down here and say this, what was it, create page HTML, and then we're going to be passing in this slug, and then we're also going to be passing in this title. So that'll give us the two variables that we need to pass in, and with everything else being disabled, it's essentially just going to run this and then it's going to display something. So I want to make sure that it's grabbing the correct slug and the correct title whenever it's created. So I'm going to go over, let me take away this for now, and we're going to go to the create page, and again I'm just going to disable the return because I'm not looking for this return right now. We'll get to that whenever we actually get it pushed out, but what I want to do is just make sure that it's grabbing the correct information whenever we go to submit it. So we're going to do echo JSON encode, and then let's say we're going to pass the title. Now let's pass the slug first because that's where the actual file is going to be created. So now if we come back over here, and I don't think we have to refresh it, but let's go ahead and try it out, and we're going to change this to test. We're going to make it say that it's a test page, and then let's give it an order ID of something like 10 because I know we haven't hit that many pages yet. So if we hit execute on it right now, it's oh, that's because we don't have a return true or return false on it right now. So let's go over here and just after it happens, let's just say return true, so we can actually see that response. There we go. Alright, so now we can see that it's grabbing the slug. So let's come in down here and also make sure that it's grabbing the title. And if it is, then we can move with the actual PHP code to create those pages. So alright, so it's grabbing our title and it's grabbing our slug. So that's exactly what we need. So inside of this, we're going to essentially use this function to get out of the folder that's the API. It's going to come down to this pages folder, and then it's going to create the template file, and then within that template file it's going to add the content, which is going to be reflective of this. So let's come in here, and I got that. Let's see, let's go to our create page again, and I always use this. Now you may have issues with this code if you're not running it on the same server. Currently the API and the file system itself is being run on the same server. If you have it split up, you may have to create another AJAX call that goes in there and call something here. But for now, just to keep it kind of simple, we're going to keep our API and our application on the same file structure so that we can just use this in order to go back to that server, the document root, which would be just our live folder, and then we're going to pass the variable. So we're going to do pages because that's the folder that we wanted to go into, and then we're going to kind of style it the same way we have here. So this is the slug.template. So we're going to pass in the slug, and then we're going to pass template. That way it's going to create that slug template. Now we need to create a variable that we can pass, so we're just going to call it file and then have it equal out to that. So we can go ahead and get rid of this part because we do not need this, and then we need to pass the content of the file, because if we just create it the way it is right now, it's essentially just going to create a blank template. So I'm going to use this about template as like a structure because I think all of the pages they're kind of the same. The only thing that really changes is the slug is passed here, which tells it which JavaScript to run. So let's create another variable called content, and I'm just going to paste in what I got from the about page, and then we're just going to change a few variables in it. So right here, obviously we need to make it where we can actually pass the single quotes, because that is part of the script that's on that page, so we need to keep that there. But we also need to pass in our slug variable. So we got our file, we got the content that we want it to say, which is again very simplistic. You can change this however you want it to be, but for our purposes this is going to do exactly what it needs to do. And then finally the last part of this would be file put contents, and then we're going to be passing in that file variable that we created, and then we're going to be passing in the content variable that we created. So essentially it's going to use a PHP function, file put contents, and it's going to create the file, and then it's going to pass in the content that we created here. Now I'm wondering why this is red. I don't think that that's an issue. I think that it's just telling me something. I have no idea what that something is. It might be because the slashes and the single quotes, but I don't think that's going to affect anything. But let me just check it real quick. I think that's yep, that's good. Alright, so now what I want to do is turn back on the create functionality. We're still going to use the create functionality the way that we did before. So what we're going to do is right here is if it creates it inside the database, it's going to return true. So we want to take what we created here, and we're going to cut it from there, and we're going to paste it in here, because it's still going to use that return true, but it's also going to run this function prior to it doing it. And then we can go back to our create, and let's go ahead and uncomment this part out and save. And now if we run our API again, it should tell us we got a success. And if we switch over here, we see now that we have a test page, and over here we see that we have a test.template. So if we click on test page, we actually have the test page title as well as the HTML only that we added in here. But we can also switch over to our database, do a refresh, so we got everything added here, and essentially it works. So that's exactly what I was hoping it would do. So yay, no issue so far. But we got all of these pages now, and this is being loaded in real time. So if we wanted to come over here and add another page, we can change this to, let's say, test 2, and then test 2 page, and then let's even go in there and change this to this is a second test page, and let's change the order ID to 11, and then we execute it. And now if we go back to our site, we have test page 2, we click on it, and test page 2 is there with this is a second test page. So right now we're using our API to create a page in the database, but we're also using it to create that template that we need down here. As you can see here, test and test 2 template. So now that that part's done, we're going to do the kind of sort of the same thing that we did there, but we're going to do it in the delete. So let's go back to our pages and go down to the bottom, and we're going to create another function, and we're going to create function delete page HTML, and what are we going to pass here? So in order for the delete functionality to run in the API, it needs to pass a ID. So currently we're getting we're not gathering that ID, so we need to pass the ID here, but we also need to pass a slug, because that slug is what is named here. It's not ID 10 or 11 or whichever one was just created .template. It's actually the slug of that page. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and we're going to pass a variable called slug, and then we're going to come back to this. So let's get out of this, and let's get out of this, because those are no longer needed. So we're going to open up the delete.php, and then inside of our delete we're going to do the same thing that we did previously. We're just going to test it for right now. So we don't want it to return any kind of response code. We actually want it to show us the ID or the slug that's being deleted. So let's go back up here, and I'm going to go ahead and just copy this function because we're going to need it. So we have our delete here, and let's go ahead and comment this out because we don't want to delete the page yet. We just want to make sure that it's grabbing the correct information. So we have our delete page here, and then so let's say instead of doing the slug right now, let's do the ID because that's what we're gathering. So if we do the ID, and then again we're gonna have to do return true just so it doesn't error out and think that there's something wrong. We're gonna do here, let's do echo JSON encode, and then we're just gonna pass that ID. So right now we see up here that we are getting the ID when we go to do delete. So we're going to take this and do this ID, and now if we run this, it should give us the ID of the page we're trying to delete. So let's go to our database and see, let's refresh this, and we got currently an ID of 8. So if we type in, try it out, ID of 8, and then execute that code, it's going to not do what we want it to do. Called undefined function. Oh, okay. That's because I got to run, it's included in the class, so it's got to be this, the function. There we go. All right, so it's passing along the ID of 8. But again, we can't use the ID to delete the template. So we have to go in there and grab that slug, which means that inside of this statement, we need to do a select statement first. So let's come up here to our delete, and we're going to create another query, and it's going to be equal to select slug from, and then I can just copy this and this. So let's take this and paste it in. So now we're selecting the slug from the database table where the ID equals the ID. And okay, so now we got to process the statement. So let's do statement equals this. We got to pass over the connection and then do our prepare, and then we got to pass the query that we created above. And then finally we got to bind the parameters. So statement equals, nope, statement bind param, and then we're going to do the same thing. Actually, you know what, let's just go ahead and copy this because it's the exact same that we're doing up there. Okay, and then we're going to execute that statement. So statement execute. So now what's going to be different is we don't want it to delete the page if the slug doesn't exist. So essentially we're going to take it where it doesn't do this if it doesn't exist. So let's come in here and say if statement row count, and if it does have a row count, we're going to run it. Else we're going to return false, then we're going to end our if. So now we need to take this and we're going to paste it inside of this. Now again, this is just testing it out. We're actually going to use this functionality and essentially paste it here, but for right now we're still just trying to make sure that it's grabbing the right information. Okay, so now that we have our row count, we're going to run our while statement. So while row equals statement, and then we're going to use the fetch. And if you don't know how to do this part, if you look at the top where it's like the single statement, you can kind of see how I did it. Well, it would actually be inside of the single.php. So essentially I'm just taking this where it's grabbing all of the information and I'm just putting it inside of this call down here by itself. So if you don't know how to do the fetch PDO, there's a lot of tutorials out there for it, or you can look at how we did it in our previous tutorial. So let's just go ahead and pass PDO fetch ASOC, and then we're going to close our while statement, and then finally we're going to pass or create this variable called slug, and it's going to be equal to row slug because that's what we're pulling from up here, and close that off. So now we should be able to pass slug to this delete page HTML and be able to run our API again and see that it's now passing the slug value of test rather than the ID of 8 or whichever one it was. So let's pass slug, and then let's just go ahead and change this to make it more concise. So we're going to be passing slug, and then we're going to encode that slug. So now if we go back over here and we hit execute again, it's giving us test. If we change this ID to 9, it should be test 2. Test 2. So good, it's working. This usually it's not this smooth. I usually have a few issues I have to deal with, but this is actually working out pretty good. Okay, so now we have we know that it's grabbing the slug that we want, so we need to run the PHP function in order to unlink that file. So let's go ahead and delete that, and we're going to create a variable called file again, and essentially let's just copy this over because it's the same thing. So we got our document root, pages, slug, template, and we're passing that slug now, and then we're just going to do unlink file. So in theory that should work. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is come back up here and make it where it actually does the delete functionality like it's supposed to. So we can take this entire statement, and after the end while, we're going to call the delete page because it needs to delete the template prior to deleting from the database. So we're going to delete the page, and then we're going to paste our query into that. So let me do, there we go. And we can get rid of this return true because it is not needed anymore either, because it's going to be calling it here and then basically just going through the delete functionality that we already had there, and then it's going to return true or false on whether or not it can delete it. So inside this function, it's going to select to see if the row exists inside the database. If it does, then we're going to grab the slug from it, delete the page, and then delete the database record. And then if it fails, it's going to return false for all of it. If it doesn't fail, it's going to return true. So if we go back to our delete, let's just uncomment this out, and we should be able to run that and see that it deletes it from here in real time, as well as on the website in real time. So let's delete the last one first. So we're going to delete ID 9, and we're going to hit execute. It says it was successfully deleted. It deleted the file here, and if we go back to our site, the test page 2 is now gone. Alright, so let's come in here and delete 8. Execute it. The test template is gone, and now that page is gone. So now if we try to access test, brings up nothing because the page doesn't exist. So I think that's pretty much what I wanted to show today. So basically just taking what we've done on the previous tutorials and expanding upon it a little bit to make it where it's you don't have to go back and forth in order to create the page template and then create the page inside the database. Essentially what this thing does is it just goes in there and does it all for you. So you can actually take this and expand upon it and make it into like a full CRUD system. I might be able to do that in a future tutorial where we take our API and turn it into our CRUD application that then runs the front end of the application. But for now, you can use the API functionality and you can run all of this stuff inside of Postman, or you can use the Swagger template files that we've created. And you can run it from here. One of the things that you might notice with Swagger is there is no place to create this authorization. So we need to create a API route that handles the authorization, and it's a pretty simple, easy thing to do. So let me go ahead and close out of, get that out of the way, go ahead and close out of these pages. Those pages, we're not going to be updating those right now. But let's go ahead and we're going to create a new route inside of our version 1. Let's see, go over here to version 1, and we're going to create a new page in here. We're just going to call it authorization. So let's create a new file and call it auth.php. And then inside of this auth.php, I'm essentially going to take what we have in some of the other pages, like for example, let's do the read for now. I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to paste it, and I'm going to remove all the stuff that we're not going to be using. So first, we don't need to have any of this for now, and we can keep the 404 there, so let's change this to if it's failed, let's just say something like could not create the token for this API. Please contact your administrator. Alright, so that should be enough to kind of get us started. And we don't need the row count because we're not returning a row count for this one. And we're just going to call our variable token so that we can kind of keep it together. That's not even what I'm going to do. Let's go here. We're going to call this token. And we're going to be in the new pages. That's fine. Past that. So now we're going to do token, and then we're going to create a function, and let's go ahead and we're going to call it auth as well. So this is basically the same thing as a regular get. I mean, we're not using it as a get right now. We're actually going to be, I guess we are kind of using it as a get. We're going to be just accessing this page to generate that token for us, and we're actually going to use JWT to create that token for us, and I'll show you how to download those scripts in just a second, but I'm going to go ahead and get this part set up. So first thing we want to do is we're going to create a function called auth inside of our pages.php. So go over here and let's take it and put it right above the read. So let's do public function auth, and then inside of this we're going to utilize JWT. So let's go ahead and add that to our API. And if you Google PHP JWT, let me put that over here. So PHP JWT, that'll bring you to Firebase on GitHub. That's the one that we want to use. So we have some calls that we need to make. So since we're already using Composer, we're going to go ahead and open up a new terminal. And in here, we're going to cd to the API directory, because that's where we want it to reside. We want it to be inside of this folder, which is inside of our API folder. And then we're just going to copy and paste what they have here. So Composer require Firebase PHP-JWT, and then we're going to run it. So while that's running, it'll take a little bit, but you'll be able to see that this folder is fixing to be updated with the Firebase folder right here, and it's done, so that's good. So now what we need to do is call the autoload inside of our pages.php, and right above this we're just going to type out something. And again, I like to use this variable just because it makes sure that I know exactly where everything is. So server, and then we're going to do document underscore root, and then /API /vendor, and then autoload.php. And basically this is just pointing to this vendor autoload.php file, and that's what's going to grab our autoload in order for us to import or use the Firebase JWT class and then the JWT functionality. Not user, use. There we go. And you can also refer down. You can see that this is where I kind of got that at. So use Firebase JWT JWT. Because of the way we have it currently loaded, that's why I'm using this to grab the autoload, because I don't think I'm calling the autoload anywhere else inside of this. I think the autoload currently is being used by the documentation part of it for this. So currently this isn't being called anywhere, and where we have it at right now is just, you would have like an initialize.php page where you would call all of this stuff, but since this is the only class that we have for our pages, this is where we're going to add it to. Now they also give you some examples of what you can type in, and we're not going to be using the OpenSSL. We're going to be using the default example, and I'll explain a little bit of what these values are as I'm typing them in. So we're going to create a variable for the IAT. The IAT is the time when this JWT was issued. It's just so that you can kind of create the sessions that match with what you want people to be able to access the API using. So for example, we can create the issue date and the expiration date, and then have it where the expiration date is 60 seconds after it was issued, or 60 minutes, or 2 days, or whatever it is. But for right now, we're just going to do IAT equals time, and then we're going to create another variable called EXP for expiration, and then that's basically going to be IAT plus 60 seconds. And I'm going to go ahead and just give it a long time right now just so we can test it. So we're going to do time 60. So that should give it, math is not working with me right now, but basically the time that it currently is plus 60 seconds times 60. So that's a lot of time. My math for how that actually would look is going to be off, but you get the point of it. You can change that to whatever you want to. And then we're going to send over a variable called payload, and this is going to be an array. And again, this is something that you can take directly off of this section over here. Basically, what you're going to be passing along is the issuer, the audience, the IAT that we created, and then the expiration that we've created. So let's go ahead and do issuer, which is going to be our API. Live, no, what is it? What is our URL for this? Live API.local. Okay, live API.local, and then /API. So this is going to be our issuer, and then down here we're going to do our audience, which currently we only have one audience, so it's kind of easy. We don't even need to do anything with this. It's just going to be the main site that's calling it. We're going to do live test.local. And then we're going to be passing in our IAT, and that's just going to be the variable that we've created. And then we're going to be passing in the expiration, which again is going to be the variable that we created. So let's I'm going to put a comment here just so you know what they are. So this is the issuer, this is the audience, this is the issue. Let's do time JWT was issued, and then finally time JWT expires. Okay, and then let's go ahead and close this off. So for our authentication, this is the variables we're going to be sending over to our JWT functionality. And again, you can refer back over to this page over here to see how to actually pass it. They're missing something over here, which I'm going to add in hours just because I want to pass over the HS2 or HS512. Which, let me see, HS512, I can't remember exactly what it stands for, but we're going to do HS512, and see if I can describe to you what it actually is. Okay, well, that's not helping at all. Here we go. HMAC SHA-512. So you can do, there's a few different ones that you can do. I believe they give you a link somewhere on their page here for how you can, where you can go. So this right here, this will kind of give you the algorithms that you can choose from. So we're going to use HS512 for hours, whereas 256 is essentially the same thing as HS512. It's just using a, the encoding for it is SHA-256 instead of SHA-512. So it just kind of depends on what you're wanting to do. But for hours, we're going to be using the HS2 or HS512. A lot of numbers going on here. Okay, so let's go ahead and create that. So we're going to create a variable called JWT, and it's going to equal to JWT encode, and then we're going to pass that payload, and then we're going to have to create a key. So let's go ahead, and I'm just going to put in this key for now, and then we'll create this key in just a second. And then we're going to pass in HS512. What am I doing wrong here? Oh, there we go. Okay, so up here, let's go right below our connection. We're going to create a private variable, and it's going to be called key. And you can call this whatever you want to make it more secure. I'm just going to add in the words private key, but definitely make that something that's encrypted. But for this purpose, we don't really need to have a high level of encryption on this demo that we're doing. But yours would be, you know, create a SHA-512 encryption key right here, paste it in, and that'll be your key that it has to validate against. Okay, so now we've created the JWT. It's going to use the Firebase JWT in order to encode it with the information that we're passing to it. It's going to use our key that we've established, and then it's going to encrypt it. So what we want to do is now return an array, and inside of this array we're going to pass a token, which is going to be the JWT, and then we're also going to pass an expires, just in case we want to use that for the front end as well. But again, this isn't something that we're focusing on right now. Then let's close that. So now we should have a authentication function that if they go to the authentication page, then they would be able to, it would run that authentication to grab that code for us. So let's come in here, and we need to return. So we're going to echo our JSON encode, and then we're going to pass the token auth. So it's basically just going to return that response here, where it's going to return this array to us, and then it's going to pass it to the front end of the API so it can be used however it needs to be used. Right now, it's just going to be used inside of our inside of our Swagger, where we're just going to create another file up here that's going to be auth, and then whenever you click on it, it's going to generate that code, and that's where you're going to be able to use it for the rest of the other functionality here. So in order to make this appear, we need to, inside of our pages.php, we need to basically, let's copy this, and we're going to add it here. We're going to change this to auth instead of read, and then that's about it, I believe. So if I refresh the page, we should have an auth here, and if we click on it, we try it out, we execute it, it's going to give us our token and the expiration date. So I'm going to go ahead and close out Firebase and this other tab here because we're not using it anymore. Once you got this far with it, you're done with it. Go ahead and close out the terminal as well. So we're going to be using this token in order to create, in order to read, single, create, update, and delete. For right now, there is no authentication, no security method on our API. So let's go ahead and change that. And the way that you do that is by going up here where we have the information about it. We're going to create a new line. And let's go ahead and just push it in one. We're going to do @OA/security scheme. And then we're going to pass what that security scheme is going to be expecting. So inside of this, we're going to pass, and I actually read a comment about the documentation for Swagger and Open Authentication and stuff like this, and I know that it's if you don't know what you're doing already, it's kind of difficult to kind of understand their documentation. That's one of the things that I really don't like about Swagger, is that their documentation is more high level than it is for entry level. So in order to find information that I'm doing right now, I mean, maybe you can Google OA security scheme, you can Google OA information. There's things that you can Google that may be able to help you, but I can't do anything about their documentation. There's not really a place that I can point you guys to that would help you understand it a little bit better. You just got to kind of do it, and then if it doesn't work, try something else. And then you also are going to run into the issue where you're looking at the 3.0 versus the 2.0. So the documentation is a little bit lacking for Swagger. But once you kind of start doing it, it's very repetitive. You just have to kind of figure out what that first point is for you. So you can follow along with this one as closely as possible, and it'll work. If you want to change something else, maybe instead of using a bearer token, you want to use an API key, there's a way that you can do that. So you can switch out some of the things that I'm doing in order to make it work with an API key instead of a bearer token like we're going to do. So just keep in mind that while we're doing this, that I already kind of know what I'm typing here, so it makes it a little bit easier for me to do. And if you have issues, Google is your friend at this point. Okay, so I'm doing a lot of talking, typing's not working. Okay, so right now we are on an insecure server because it is a local server for us. What we're going to do, it's only going to have HTTP encryption, so there's no HTTPS on it. If you were doing this on a live server, you'd want to change that to HTTPS or comma HTTPS, so you can use both of them. But ours for now is just going to be HTTP. All right, so let's add in our description for what our security is going to be, and then we're just going to put in something, use/auth to get the JWT token. And then let's also we're going to name this, so name equals authorization, because that's what we're going to be looking for whenever we go to grab the variable from the session headers. And it's going to be passed in the header. And we're also going to be using the scheme bearer. If you're not familiar with that, it's basically just an encrypted variable that gets sent over through the header. So bearer, and then we're going to be passing the bearer format, which is going to be JWT, because that's what we are currently using. So bearer format equals JWT. And then finally, we're going to be passing over the security scheme, and we're going to make that equal to bearer auth. And I believe that is all that we would need to do here in order to get this to show authorization. So let's refresh. And now we have this new button that's called authorize. If you click on it, it's going to give you a place where you can enter in this authorization token that is going to be generated through here. So in the real world, whenever someone logs in, this route right here would actually be ran automatically. So they would be able to get that bearer token that they need. It's going to be stored as a session variable, and it's going to be pushed out to the API every time they go to use it. For right now, we're doing it the manual way, but I think in the next video, I'll show you how to take what we have on the front end of the website and actually pass it through the AJAX calls. But for now, we're going to have to essentially try it out, copy it, and do this, so forth and so on. But in order to use the token that's being sent over inside of the functions that we currently have here, we are going to have to add another variable to them, and this is going to be security equals, and then open curly bracket, and then we're going to be passing the bearer auth, which is what we called it up there, and then it's going to be blank for now. So it's just going to not contain anything. But this bearer auth is what we called it here. So now, if we refresh the page again, let me go ahead and minimize this. Currently there's nothing over here, but whenever you have authentication and security added to these routes, there will be a lock over here. So if we refresh, we now see that there is a lock on the read. Obviously, you don't want to have a lock on your authentication because you can't do the authentication route until you get the authentication, or you can't use the authentication until you get it. So for this one, it's going to be completely unlocked. It's going to be just used to generate it. But what I want to show you now is if we hit try it out, it's still going to work because we don't have any of the code inside of our pages that tells it not to work if it doesn't see that that authentication being pushed through. But what we're going to do is add that code that will basically make it, when we go to run this again, it's going to give us an error message. So let's go ahead and add that code inside of our read function. And in here, it's a pretty easy code to be able to add it. So if you're using Apache like I am, then this should work for you, but there may be other ways for you to request a header on your own server, but this is the way that I would do it since I'm using Apache. So I'm going to create a variable called headers, and then I'm going to use the PHP function Apache request headers, and then that's going to grab, that's not what I want to do, Apache underscore request headers. That's going to grab all the headers that are being sent over. And then we want to see what's being sent over to us. So let's go ahead and we're going to create a variable called token, and it's going to equal to header authorization. So I wonder if I can show you, actually let's, before we break that out, let me do a print our headers so I can show you what's currently being sent over. So that's probably going to break this. It is. Okay. So right now, because nothing's being saved in our headers, nothing's being sent over. But if we come over here to our authorization, we try it out, and it's going to give us this token. So we're going to copy the token from here, and then we're going to use the authorize button to authorize this. So currently it says that we're logged into the API. So now if we execute this again, we now have an authorization token, which has bearer and then the authorization or the token that was sent over to it. So what we need to do inside of our headers, we need to grab that authorization. So let's come over here and let's create this variable token. Did it again. Token, and then we're going to make it equal to the headers and the authorization key. Authorization. Okay. So right now, if we echo out token and we refresh our browser, or not refresh it, but we execute it again, you can see that it's passing the word bearer and a space with it before you get to that token. So what we want to do on this headers is remove that, and we're just going to use a simple function called string replace, and we're going to remove bearer space, and we're just going to replace it with nothing. That way that we can actually get the correct authorization token. So it's just another encryption method that's on there to make sure that it's doing what we want it to do. Alright, so now that that's removed, that's what we want to see, is that it's actually pushing over that token. So now we need to do a try, because if you don't do a try statement, it's essentially going to try to process that, and if the token doesn't exist, it's going to give you an error message instead of giving you the correct return that you're looking for. So on this side of it, we're going to do try, and then we're going to have all of this is going to eventually be inside of our try. So we're going to try this token, so token, and then we're going to equal to JWT decode, and then we're going to pass in that information. And if you can't remember what, I'll already close it out, but if you do, let's see, Firebase JWT, if you look on their GitHub page, you'll see that they have a decode function right here. So this is essentially what we're writing right now, the decode. So that's just going to verify that that token is actually something that has been encrypted on our server and it's being used, so it's something that we can actually pull from in order to get the information. One thing that I didn't tell y'all about is up here you actually have the ability to send data. So if we go back over here, actually I don't think that they have it here. So we have inside of our payload, we can send over username, an encrypted password, their account level, all this other kind of stuff can be encrypted inside of that JWT token. Right now we're not doing that because we're essentially just reading from a page, but if you had someone that was logging into your system, you could give them that information and have it encrypted inside that token, and then whenever it gets decoded over here, you could use that information for them to be able to look up certain things based on their level without giving away what their level is inside of the browser. Okay, so back to the code. So we're going to do try, and let's go ahead and just fix this so it doesn't break it anymore. So catch, we're going to do exception E, and then we're going to end that. We're just going to return false if it doesn't decode the way we want it to. So the variables that we need to pass over here is first the token, which is here, and then we're going to pass again this key, which will grab our key from up here so that it knows that this is the one it needs to decode. And then we're also going to be passing in the encryption method that we used, which is the HS512. So that should be able to decrypt our token. So we're going to take this, we're going to cut it from here, and we're going to paste it in here. And there. Nope. There. Okay, so now it's going to try to decrypt our token that's being sent over. If it fails, it's going to return false. If it passes, it's going to run the code that we want it to. So now if we come over to our UI, I'm just going to refresh the page so it gets rid of the authorization that we've done. And now if we come over here and we hit try it out, execute, it's currently we don't have the front end of the read page that actually displays anything if there is a if there's an error in it. It just displays the HTML code, which we'll fix this in just a second. One other thing that I just thought of is that if you can see in the error message here, it says undefined index authorization. That's because we didn't send anything over. So right now it's checking to see if the token is valid, but currently there is no token. So before we hit our try statement over here, we need to check to see if the header's authorization is there, and if it's not, return false again. So let's do if is set, and then header's authorization, and then we can bring all of this inside of that, and then do an else, return false, and then end if. So with this, we should be able to run this again, and it's no longer displaying the error that it can't find the authorization, but it's still displaying the error because it's looking for our row count. So if we go to our read, this is where it's currently erroring out at. It's trying to get that row count, even though it technically doesn't exist. So I'm going to come over here, and what we need to do here is we're pushing back a false, and if it's true, we want to run it. If it's false, we want it to do something else. So over here, we can do if statement, and then have all of this contained inside of that if statement, else, end if. So essentially what this is going to do, if it's returning false, it's going to not do any of this, and it's going to actually come down here, and we're going to put a response here, and it said, let's just say it's going to do your token did not match the expected token. Please contact an administrator. I think that should be all that we need here. Okay, so now if we rerun this code, it should give us our error message. There we go. It says your token did not match the expected token. So, and you can change that message. You can say that your token hasn't been set. Whatever you want to say. But for right now, let's try to authorize it with a inaccurate code. So let's do 1, 2, 3, 4, and close that, and let's hit execute. And it's still failing because inside of our code over here, that if it, even though it's being set now, if it doesn't work inside of our try statement, it's going to return false. So it's currently returning false. But if we come over here to our authorize and try it out, we're going to be gathering this token, and we're going to authorize it. So let's log that one out, put a new one in, close it, get rid of that, and now if we hit execute, it reads the pages as it should. So just in case you're wondering what's happening to the front end of our website right now, well, without that token, the front end is not displaying the menu. Or here, let's do this. Okay, so resize it so y'all can see it a little bit better. But currently it is not displaying the menu because this read is what gathers the menu items for us. So on the next tutorial, I'll show you how to bring that where the AJAX actually passes over the authorization token. But for now, we're going to not worry about the front end because we want to manage the back end primarily. All right, so we got this one working, and let's go ahead and bring this back up to where it was. Let's cancel this and refresh so we're completely unlocked. So now we want to do the same thing with all of our other functions. We want to have them all use this bearer authentication. So underneath your responses for each one of them, for your error codes, we're just going to paste in the security methods. So now if we refresh this page, wait, what did I do? Security, comma, put a comma before it. Refresh it. So now we have both of those that are going to be looking for that bearer authorization. All right, so let's do comma, do that one again, and do it again down here. And again, you wouldn't necessarily do this for each one of your pages in your API. For example, the read and the single don't have to be locked behind an API. The create, update, and delete should be, but it would be better if you had it inside of an administrative API rather than a front-end API. So just keep that in mind. We're just going to be adding it to all of our functions just to prove a proof of concept here. And then we don't need it for that. So if we refresh this, all of our routes now have a lock on them. And the good news is that whenever you authorize one of them, it authorizes all of them. So we can come over here and get rid of that. Let's authorize it. And now each one of these show the locks that are currently locked because you are authorized inside of it. And we need to create the functionality for the other ones, but again, this one still works because it's got the correct information being displayed. The create it's still going to work right now because we're not actually passing anything to it. But what we want to do is code the other functions to do the exact same thing that we did for our read. So let's scroll back up to our read here, and essentially what we need to do to make this as easy as possible is just go in here and add this code for each one of them and then just change out what it's expecting. So for the read, we're going to come over here, we're just going to copy it, and let's just go ahead and I'm going to paste it here, put a little space between so I know which one I'm looking at. I'm going to paste it here, a little space between, then I'm going to paste it here with a space between, and then here with the space between. So now that we have that pasted, so this is the one we pasted it from, we're going to take this and we're just going to throw it in where the functionality is. So let's get rid of the spaces now, and we keep the token because that's definitely what we need, but everything else can be replaced with the code that's actually supposed to be there. Alright, so that looks good. Now scroll down, we got our spacing, so let's copy this. Get rid of the spacing, and then from here to the token, we're going to, it uncopied what I copied. Okay, so let's copy that again, and go back to this, and paste it in, move it over so it's pretty. Okay, now let's do the same thing with this one. Okay, here, and then underneath the token, all the way to where the return is, I'm going to paste it in. And then I think this is going to be our last one we have to do. So we copy that code again, and from the return, it's right below the token, paste it in, make it pretty, and now all of our functions are currently using the same functionality that our read had. So we refresh this again, and let's go to single. Let's try it out, and one of the slugs is about. We hit execute. Again, this is one of those issues where the front end of it needs to be coded the same way as here because it's looking for this row count. So we're going to go to single, and we're going to do if statement, and then we're going to do our else statement, which I'm just going to copy from the read page. So our else statement is going to be here, and we're just going to paste that down. So now if we rerun this, now it says that our token did not match. But if we come over here and we grab a token, execute, copy that, let's paste it inside of our authorize, and now if we try to read it again, it gives us the correct information because it's passing over that token and it's looking for it. Now with the update and the delete and the create, we already have a response code that if the page isn't updated for whatever reason, it's just going to return an unsuccessful. So we don't really have to add that code that we did for the single where it's, you know, looking at the statement to see if it's returning anything, because technically we don't care about it at this point because we already have an error message that says that if it's been updated or not. And then that's going to be based on this pages where it's actually returning what it needs to. So if it returns false, it's automatically going to show this error message that it was not successfully updated anyway, so we don't have to worry about the front end part of that display. So we come over here to the update, and let's try it out. Let me log into the database real quick to make sure. So live pages, the about page is ID2, so let's do, let's first try it without anything happening, which it should fail. Nope, updated successfully. That's because I just added the HTML to it. That's fine. So let's refresh this, and now that changes, which that's fine. We can update that at a later time. But if we try to run it again without changing anything, it's going to say that it's failed. And then let's go ahead and, just to test it out, refresh the page, try to update it without any authorization, and it's going to give us that page was not updated successfully. That's because we're not passing anything. And then I don't have to do the rest of them because the other pages are going to be the exact same. So you got your update, delete, and your create. They're all going to be displaying the error messages. So as long as we have it coded over here correctly, then it'll still update where it needs to on this side of it. So I think, let me check my time. 40 minutes. This is a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. So I think for now, we are done with this tutorial. Basically what I wanted to show you was how to create the session and the tokens and everything in order to be able to pass it along and prevent people from being able to run this code without having previously been authorized. So that's going to do it for this tutorial. I think the next tutorial I'm actually going to show you the front end of this. So it's going to be live api.local. And what I'm going to show you on this one is how to generate this menu, which currently there's nothing there. Also how to get to the pages using the API, using Ajax in order to kind of generate this this authorization URL, store it as a session variable, and then use that as part of your Ajax to be able to push it out to be able to view everything else. So the first thing I want to show you is we currently have these things that are working with authorization token. So if we click over here and we try it out, it generates this token for us. And if we paste this token into our authorized field, it opens up all of these other ones now that we can come in here and actually be able to read it. So what we want to do is take this exact same functionality and apply it to here. So let's zoom out of this a little bit, and there we go. So currently there's no navigation, because if you remember from one of my past videos, I have it all being generated dynamically. So the template, the page titles, the names, the descriptions, the links, everything's being generated from our API. So what I want to do now is make it where this information actually gets displayed. So let's jump into the code. I'm going to take away all of this stuff for now. And we are going to, let's close down the API. We're going to open up our app.js. And inside of this, we need to create a function that hits our authorization URL. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy this list pages just because it's be easier than having to rewrite the whole thing. And over here, I'm just going to title this function auth. And then before we call the list pages, I want to make sure it calls the auth in order to grab that, that token for us. So we don't need to run anything inside of this because there's nothing going to be returned except for a token and a date for when it expires. So let's change this to our URL for the authorization, which, if you will remember on this, it is API v1 pages auth. So API v1 pages auth, and that's where we want to go. So we're not going to be sending anything over to it. If you were using this as part of a login, you'd be sending a username and password to it. But for right now, we're not worrying about any of this. We're just displaying the data and grabbing that token. So once we post to the authorization, we want to see what it's returning. So I'm going to do console.log, and then I'm just going to log out everything that's being pushed over through this call. So let me open up this, and I'm going to open up the inspector. Let's go to our console and refresh it. So currently, let's take this away because we don't want it doing that right now. Do a hard refresh, and as you can see here, it's gathering the token. That's exactly what is produced on this side of it. So if we try this out and we execute it, you can see that it's passing over the token and the expires, which is what we are seeing here. So expires and token. That is what we want to see inside of this. And let me just make sure that y'all can see that. Okay, just verifying that that was there. All right, so now we know that we want to store this token somewhere. And the easiest way to do that would be to set it as a local storage, I guess a session for the local storage. So what we're going to do here is using jQuery, local storage dot set item, and then we're going to set the variable token, and we're going to pass data dot token because that's what's coming back from our data. So now if we come back over here and we go to our application, local storage, API local, let's do a refresh, we can see that that token is now being set with the value that's being gathered. So now that we have that value, we want to pass it as part of the headers for the other functionality that we have down here. So we're going to add a new variable called headers, and inside of this we're going to pass a JSON string that is going to be called authorization, because if you remember back whenever we created that part of it, the authorization was the token that we were looking for. So we're going to pass authorization, and it's just going to be local storage dot get item, and then it's going to be token because that's what we called it at the top, and then put a comma after that. So now if we go back to our browser, let's do a hard refresh, and oh, that's because I forgot to call list pages. Let's uncomment that back out. Now we do a hard refresh, you can see that our navigation is here. The content of the pages are still not there, so we need to also take the part that we're doing the content, and we need to add this one line to it. And that would be done inside of our initialize.js. And let's pass it right before the success. Do a hard refresh again. Let's see what's going on here. Console. So it's not being found. Okay, well, I tried out a few things, and it wasn't actually anything wrong with the code. It was just not loading the initialize.js. So the way that I fixed that was I opened up a new window, /js/initialize.js, and now it's pulling over what we wanted it to with the authorization headers. So I don't know why. Sometimes it does that way where even if I do a hard refresh, it still doesn't load it properly. So just browsing out to the initialize.js and then refreshing the page made it grab the information that it needed to. But as you can see over here, it's now pulling the information from the pages. So we're going to go over here into our Swagger UI, and we are going to update this right here, because part of our test last week we actually changed it where it says HTML only. So we're going to change this to this is the About Us page, and let's capitalize this, execute it, make sure everything was updated. So now if we refresh, now it changes. So it's currently hitting the API correctly based on the local storage of it grabbing that token that we needed to. So essentially that's what I wanted to show y'all in this video. I know this was kind of a short video, but this was probably the easier part of setting up the tokenization from last week. Last week it took about 40 minutes to record that video. So this one's probably going to be a lot shorter than that, maybe 15 minutes or so. But essentially we just add in the script to create the authorization, or go to the authorization route. We grab the information, we set it as a local storage item, and then we use that as part of our headers for the list pages to display the list up here, as well as the individual pages to display the content for each page. So that's about it. Let me think. So like I said in the previous video, this video you wouldn't necessarily use it for the front-end access of the website. The front-end access of the website would be using this functionality, or the read or the single without the authorization involved in it. The only thing that you would need authorization for is to be able to log into an administration panel to modify the create, the update, or the delete function. So for right now, I have it all kind of combined into one, but just keep that in mind whenever you're developing it, because right now we're generating this authorization code without anything actually being input into it, which isn't the most secure way to do it, but I was just kind of showing you how to do it. The way that you would actually do it with an actual CRUD application would be where you pass the username and the password whenever they go to submit a form. Then it'll run this route here. It'll gather the information for the token, and then as part of the token, whenever you're passing that token back to the system, you can create an encrypted version of their email address, their user ID, the level that they are inside of the system. There's a lot of stuff that you can do and you can pass as part of that encrypted token. But for right now, I'm just showing you how to actually use it on the front end and the back end. But again, this isn't the normal way that you would do it, but this is kind of just taking what we've already done and building onto it. Well, I think that's going to do it for this compilation tutorial. I know this set of videos that I've done are some of the most popular videos that I have on my channel. So hopefully seeing them all together kind of helps you get a really broad understanding of how to use Swagger and how to set up JWT and how to use that through Ajax and create sessions and stuff like that. So hopefully it helped out for some of the people that needed it to. But I think that's about it. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already subscribed to the channel. I got plenty more videos like this, and I plan on having a lot more coming out in 2021. So this will probably be the last compilation video that I do for a while. But just look out for the next ones. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.